I'm not going to hold anything back. And what I would encourage is an open discussion. If you think that real estate agents are scam artists or con artists or used car salesmen or whatever, I would like to have a conversation with you. I would prefer not, anonymous comments, but if you have something thoughtful you would like to share, I'll have you come on and we can shake it up. Let me start with the lawsuit that said that real estate companies and the National Association of Realtors conspired to inflate commissions, and it had to do with the fact that when you sell your house through a listing agent, the buyer's agent who represents the buyer gets paid through the transaction. The way it works here in the state of Maryland is you are paying a listing agent, and during the contract that you write with the listing agent, there is a box that indicates how much the buyer's agent will be paid out of the listing agent's commission, and you're free to put in whatever you want. Now, I will say that many times a listing agent will suggest to a homeowner how much to put in that box, and I'm not going to comment on whether or not there was a conspiracy because I wasn't aware of one. No one's ever told me anything like that. They were sort of discussing, or they were alleging that the National Association of Realtors, which I'm a member of, but I have, I don't work for that organization, and then brokerages, which again, I'm a licensed realtor as an independent contractor. I don't work for eXp Realty, so I'm not a employee of either one, and I don't know how they've ever communicated with each other. And as far as I know, they didn't demonstrate that there was some communication between them. It was more of like this sort of an understanding, but they didn't have any actual evidence where they said, this person said, we're going to set the commissions at 6%. And I would like to start with that, right? Like, let's get right into the money. That's what this is all about. So before I do, I'll just say this. When you look at, and I just read the New York Times article about this, and if you go down to the comment section on the New York Times or any website that is discussing this issue, real estate agents and real estate agent commissions, 100% of the comments are negative. I think there's a couple reasons for that, and I'm going to discuss what I think would create a situation where people would feel better about real estate agents. I'm going to get to that in the end. And this, again, will be a long video. So I want to start with this idea of, everybody, first of all, says 6%, 6%. There's always a negotiation for real estate commissions. If you type into Google, discount real estate agency, sell your house without a realtor, whatever, there's 1,000,001 different ways to sell your house and not pay a 6% commission, or you can pay more than a 6% commission. The people that choose to do so can put their house on the MLS and sell it directly for sale by owner. Or you can do a hybrid model where you hire a real estate agent at a discount, like maybe $500, and they will upload your pictures for you and maybe help you do your contract. But you're going to be responsible for things like setting appointments, negotiating the terms. And part of that conversation, when you decide to sell your house through a brokerage, a discount brokerage, is you have to indicate how much money you're going to pay a buyer's agent. And we'll talk about that later. But let me just start by saying there are every level of selling your house, as far as like the level of involvement that you could get from a real estate agent, all the way from you do it all by yourself, or you hire somebody like me and I do 99% of everything. And your job is just to make decisions based on hopefully taking my advice, right? So the large majority of homeowners who decide that they want to do this on their own end up hiring a real estate agent after trying it. Put your house on forsalebyowner.com or whatever it is, Zillow, and then they end up taking it off and signing an agreement with the real estate agent. Those are the ones that are even brave enough to do it. Like the 90% of people don't even try it. But the 10% who do try it, like 80% of them end up unsuccessful hiring a real estate agent. So why is it that so many people choose to hire a real estate agent when clearly it is 2023 and everybody is aware that the internet does have plenty of articles on how to do whatever you want to do. You can go on YouTube and you can go on Google and type in how to sell your house by yourself, or you can, like I said, hire a discount real estate company to give you a lower level of service. Anybody can do that. So why don't people do it? The reason I believe that people do not do it is the decision-making process that goes into selling your house has huge implications. For many people, their home is their largest investment. So how this process is handled determines how much profit you make when you sell your house. And how much profit you make is your retirement, is going to be a down payment on your next house where your family is going to live, is going to be maybe the last house you ever buy. And however much money you make from selling this house determines the house you live in for the rest of your life. Like, it's a lot of money, right? It's a big deal. And people are intimidated because in a normal day-to-day life, people don't normally transact more than a couple $1,000s ever. You might sell a car once or twice in your life. Even then, think about this. Most people are well aware if you trade your car in, you're going to get way less money than you could if you sold it on your own. Why don't people sell it on their own? Because it's not that hard. I mean, literally, you can just take your phone out, take a picture of it, put it on Facebook Marketplace, type in the number of miles and the model, and your phone will start to ring. Why not? It's super easy. Why don't people do it? Because they don't want to have to deal with it. You have all these big decisions to make, and then you have the idea that Americans do not enjoy negotiating. If you go to other countries and you walk down the street and you see a pair of sunglasses sitting on a table and they say $20 on the sunglasses, the people that live in that town are not paying $20. They'll know, oh, I'm not paying this. And you see these people screaming at each other and you think they're getting ready to get into a fist fight, and that's just how they talk. And they get the glasses for whatever it is, $10. Like, maybe dumb Americans will pay $20 because that's the way it is. But in other parts of the world, people are very comfortable negotiating and saying, I'm not paying that, or I'm not giving you that. In America, for whatever reason, maybe because we come from British colonies where people are way too polite and we just aren't comfortable with that idea, or we're afraid we're going to screw it up, which, by the way, is a wise thought, right? So then you have all these big decisions to make. How much am I going to sell my house for? That's a huge decision because you only have three possibilities. You either undersell it, you just give all your money away to somebody for free without them having to even come wash your car or anything. You just so happen to like nail the price where you sell it for the amount to sell it for, or you overprice your house. And people think, well, if you overprice it, then you just keep dropping it till you sell it. Well, that could be a strategy. And you don't know what you're doing. You don't know what your value is because you've only ever sold one house or two houses in your life. And you're basing it off, what your neighbor down the street sold for, or around the way. Maybe it was 6 months ago in a different market. You don't have any idea what you're doing. And if you overprice your house, it could then drag this process out longer than it needs to be. And then your ultimate offer might not be as much as it had been when you first put it on the market. Your house is worth the most money. So that's just one thing that you have to figure out, right? I was just briefly getting into pricing. Now, the next decision you have to make is whether or not you're going to fix your house up to sell it. Then you have to decide which repairs you're going to make before you get your house ready to sell. And then after the buyer has the home inspection, they found 57 items. Which ones are you going to agree to fix? What if they want you to fix all 57? Are you going to fix them all? If you don't fix them all, they can turn around and walk away. How are you going to handle that? Are you going to be able to fix just the right amount so that you're not spending too much money, but you keep them in the deal? How do you manage that process? What if the buyer changes their mind? What if the buyer loan ends up not getting done in time and they need you to give them 2 extra weeks? Or what if they are coming in from out of town and they want to move into your house early? Like, how do you handle that? What if something happens during the process? The buyers get there on the day to move in and they say, oh, the house is in bad condition and we're not going to sign. What do you do? Like, how do you know what your options are? What's the best option? There's a lot of things that can go wrong, and everybody has at least somebody they know who's been through a horrible real estate transaction. And especially those people are adamant that they do not want to do this by themselves. So then we have the idea of showing the property. Because if you don't have a real estate agent and you're for sale by owner, all these people have to come to your house. You don't know who they are. They're not represented by somebody, so theoretically they could be anybody, qualified or not. You're like, hey, are you qualified? Well, I mean, is anybody going to say no? Right? And then you have a personal safety issue. You have the issue of being concerned with whether or not your personal items are safe. And then you have the idea that every time somebody comes to your house, you might have kids there and animals, and do they all leave, but then you stay behind? Or how do you even handle that part of the process? And what if you have to go out of town and then maybe the buyer really needs to come see your house while you're at work, and because they're like in town for maybe a day because they're in the military and they're getting ready to get on an airplane to go back to wherever they're from, and then they're moving here in 2 months and they have to find a house, and the only time they have to see it is 2 o'clock today, but you're at work. How are you going to handle that? So there's the showings, right? All of those things work together in a way that Americans do not want to do this themselves most of the time. They do want to hire a real estate agent. So I think we can all agree that a highly professional, well-trained agent that has great advice, a great process, and who is friendly and attentive and responsive and has tons of experience to help navigate you through this process, and when really big things come up, they're able to solve your problems for you. People do see value in that, and I think that anybody who has been through a situation like that will say, you know what, I really appreciate my listing agent. Now, the buyer's agent, it seems to be where the rub is, right? It's like, well, you have this situation where people are trying to buy a home and the seller is somehow paying for it. How does that make sense? Because the buyer's agent in Maryland, we don't have dual representation. You can't represent a buyer and a seller. So the listing agent only represents the home seller and the buyer's agent only represents the home buyer. And we have something called a fiduciary responsibility. So we are obligated to protect our clients' interests above everything at all times. So I tell people, like, when I'm selling your house, I only work for you at all times. If somebody calls me and says, I don't have a real estate agent and I want to buy your house, I will only be representing your interests throughout this entire process. And I was like, well, there's a conflict of interest. I can see how you might think that. You know, we can get into that into another video. I would argue that it will end up better for you if the buyer's unrepresented, because guess who's the only person talking to them? Me. And I am looking out for you. So how is that going to work out in the end, in my experience, better for the seller? And that's where the buyer's agent representation being questioned by everyone saying that they're not necessary, I would object to that somewhat. I would say that we have a couple problems we would need to solve. The first being, who's going to show the property? Is the listing agent going to go to your home every time somebody calls and says, well, I want to see this house? What if the listing agent has another house to sell and somebody else already called them to go see that house and they have to drive across town to show that house? And then that person wants to buy it. So now they're going to be tied up for the next 3 hours writing an offer. And somebody wants to come see your house. Maybe it's that military family who's only in town for the next 4 hours or whatever. They're trying to make a decision on another property, but they want to see yours before they make that final decision, but they can't because your listing agent is selling 5 or 6 other people's houses. Who's going to show them the house? Are you going to do it? The homeowners with no buyer's agents, somebody has to let them in the house and show them the house. I would argue that I don't want my homeowners showing the properties to these buyers because I'm afraid they're going to say something that will compromise their situation. Like, oh, we're going to fix that, or oh, we're not worried about that, or oh, we'll take this or whatever. Like, I'm going to make sure that we're always trying to get top dollar and we're going to navigate the situation that way. I don't want my home sellers talking to the buyers all the time. If there's no buyer's agent showing them the property, who's going to show them the property? It's like, okay, well, maybe the buyer's agent does, but maybe the buyer just pays for it themselves. Say, okay, that is what seems to be like the option everybody is leaning towards. Like maybe now people will just pay their buyer's agents. The challenge would be, and this is what I see, many times home buyers are not even aware that they have to pay the closing costs and they don't know what they are. So they're in this area, the 3 to 3.5%. Let's say the average sales price is $500,000. On top of their down payment, they have to come up with $15,000 to maybe $20,000 to pay for all their closing costs. If you had to then pay a real estate agent over and above that, I think it would create even more of a burden on what is already a very, very tough market for buyers. Like in the past 3 or 4 years, being a home buyer has been an absolute nightmare in many parts of the country. Like trying to get past all these other people that are putting in 5 and 10 and 20 offers, in some places 50 offers with $100,000 over asking price, waiving appraisals, waiving inspections, and you're a first-time home buyer and you need some closing help. Like, I don't know how that's going to work. And then it's like, okay, on top of that, you have to pay for your real estate agent. I just don't see how that is going to be feasible, especially on the low end of the market. The $250,000 first-time home buyer who is got their parents fronting them some money in order to pay their closing costs or their down payment, or is going to be like, well, I can't afford a real estate agent. I'm just going to have to go directly to the listing agent to try to save that money. That's what I'm going to do. What I think is going to happen if that is the way that this goes is the low end of the market is going to get terrible service. If the only person in the transaction is a representative for the home seller and the buyer is unrepresented, just like naked and afraid out here trying to buy a house, they don't know how to negotiate to protect themselves. It's like, oh, well, listen, the seller is saying they're not going to allow you to do any inspections. Well, okay. Like a buyer's agent would be like, listen, like, I'm going to advise you not to buy that house. And then you obviously can make that decision. But if you don't know any better, and I'm just giving you one example. And again, I'm not an attorney. I don't play one on TV. I'm not going to pretend to try to give you legal scenarios here. But what I feel like is going to happen is an unrepresented buyer who then finds out that this or that happened and they feel like they got taken advantage of is going to want to sue everybody. And we already have 1 out of every 10 transactions where somebody wants to sue somebody. And if we take away 50% of the representation and leave buyers dangling in the wind, it's going to cause that situation to come up way more often. You bought a house, you didn't know this. You bought a house, you didn't know that. I wish somebody would have told me this. I didn't know this and nobody told me. Like maybe they create some kind of like long disclosure thing that they make you read it and sign it that says you should do this and you should do that. But people already do that. Anytime you buy something that comes with all this crap that nobody reads. You go to a website, you got this stupid user agreement, nobody reads it. You go to buy a house, you go to settlement, nobody reads it. You sign your contract, most of the time nobody reads it. You're just trusting the people that are helping you. So you buy a house with no real estate agent, that's a scary thing for most people. For some people, it's no big deal, like whatever. You know, let's say the roof's leaking. I got enough money, I can fix the roof. I'm not worried about it. I can clearly see. I'll get a home inspection. I'm not worried about it. Many people can handle this, but a lot of people are vulnerable, and a lot of people would get taken advantage of if they didn't have a real estate agent. On the high end of the market, you're buying $1 million, $2 million house. I feel like that person would be like, sure, I want good representation. I'm going to pay $20,000 or whatever it is to have somebody do this. Then you have the situation where you want to go see a house and you don't have a real estate agent. You call up like, hey, I want to go see this house. You call up a buyer's agent. Like today, you can do that, and 90% of buyer's agents will get in their car and meet a stranger at a house. 90%. I could be wrong, but that's probably the number. Once this happens and we say that buyer's agents are not allowed to get paid from the seller or the listing agent any longer, and you have to get paid from the buyer, do you think that they're going to get in their car and show you a house if you're a stranger without agreeing to something or even paying for them up front? Like, you got to pay for my gas. It's like an Uber. Like, you don't, there's no free lunch, like, unless you agree to pay at a later date. I just feel like it's barely like the average real estate agent now makes like less than $55,000. They actually the average agent sells 2 or 3 houses a year. Most of them are part-time agents. And I'm going to get into why that's the biggest problem. But just starting with just that scenario, you have buyers that you drive around for 2 years, and at the end of 2 years, they decide not to buy a house. That's with you getting paid on average 2.5% from the listing agent. If I'm not getting paid at all from the listing agent, and I'm just saying me metaphorically, I am not likely to want to drive you around for 2 years for free. So maybe they create some hybrid situation where buyers go look at their own houses, then they hire an attorney to help them fill out the paperwork, and maybe you pay somebody $1,500 to give you advice and you get paid at the settlement table. Maybe there's some sort of a company out there that provides some like over the internet advice where you can sort of chat with a licensed realtor over Zoom and ask them a bunch of questions for $100 an hour. I mean, I could see something like that happening. The overall quality of service will likely go down for buyers especially. And it will be a nightmare for home sellers when you have to deal with a buyer who does not have anybody keeping them in line. Like, no, you cannot ask for 57 things to be fixed when you're trying to buy a house. And we were one of 5 competing offers. Like, I know we requested a home inspection, but I don't think it's advisable that you ask for 57 items, because if they say no, well, you could still walk away from the deal. So you could ask for whatever you want. But and then if you have that expectation, you're going to get your feelings hurt. And you're like, well, I'm going to walk away from the deal if they don't agree to this. Or if they're not going to give me this, I'm going to walk away from the deal. It's good to have a buyer's agent say, no, that's not the way this normally works. That's not a good idea. You shouldn't walk away from this deal based on this or that. I feel like that everybody, for the most part, is more upset about the sellers paying for the buyer's agents, but there is no good solution, in my opinion. But I do have a suggestion, and we are now 27 minutes into this video. So if you're still watching, you're probably a real estate agent, or you have nothing else to do, or you find me entertaining, whatever. So if you're still listening, here's my suggestion, right? The biggest challenge, and this has been proven through a survey they did like 4 or 5 years ago, and they interviewed like 100,000 real estate agents, and they said, what's the biggest threat to the real estate industry? And they were correct. It is real estate agents. And the reason for that is because it is too easy to be a real estate agent. It is too easy to stay a real estate agent. And the way that the industry is structured does not incentivize highly trained, highly professional real estate agents being highly trained before they start to work with somebody. The best real estate agents are the ones who started as a brand new agent who did not know what they were doing, going through a lot of transactions, maybe making some mistakes, learning along the way, and then becoming a professional. A better way to do it would be a model similar to the financial services industry, where you have a Series 7 license, which is extremely hard to get. You work for a firm that is highly structured. The way that you are required to do business is very structured. If you work at like an Edward Jones or American Century or something like that. Like if you go to a New York Life office and you speak to Tom in Maryland, and then you go 100 miles away and talk to, Bill in Pennsylvania or Cheryl or whatever, you're likely to get the same forms with the same numbers on them and very similar advice, because it's highly structured. And the way that they will email you. Their email signatures will look the same, and their conversations will be very similar because it's a very structured environment, and we don't have that here. And the reason for that is because it is a 100% commission, 100% get your own business, and what do they say? Eat what you kill or something like that. Like, if you don't have any people who have raised their hands, so to speak, to hire you to sell a house or to help them buy a house, you won't make any money because no one's going to pay you any money just to be a real estate agent and to show up for work. You have to find the people yourself. Now, there are offices out there like Redfin where you can go on a very low salary and then take I believe they get a bonus per transaction based on how many stars they get. And you can, work under a different model. It's the only model that I know of that's structured that way. As far as every other brokerage that I know of, other than these discount brokerages where you pay like $1,200 and they put your house on the MLS, like although the main brokerages that have independent agents that are working for themselves as a 1099 employee or a 1099, whatever you call it, independent contractor, they are required to get their own business, and because of that, most of them are unsuccessful. That's 89% of realtors are out of the business before 60 months. So therefore, because a brokerage is now in 2023 required, because of the market pressure, to give real estate agents the large percentage of the commission, there's not a lot of money and incentive to invest an enormous amount of time in real estate agents in the very beginning because 90% of them aren't going to make it. So if you spend all this time training people and you know that the ones that are struggling the most take up the most amount of time and they have to go get their own business, and you're investing all this time to create this very trained, highly structured person who may never even get a client. And then after that, you're only going to be able to take a small percentage of their salary. And then once they get good at it, they're going to leave you and go work for somebody else because we're independent contractors and we have no there's no non-compete clauses where you can just switch companies anytime you want. Once you get good, you're going to go work for somebody and become like a 100% agent. You'll just go work somewhere. You pay maybe a monthly fee, $500 a month. You keep 100% of your commission. Back in the day, the brokerages had a role in bringing in the business. You had a physical office that people would walk into and say, "Hi, I need a real estate agent. I have to sell my house." And the office lady would be like, "Well, today Susie is right here to help you." And then if you had desk duty, you would get that client. It doesn't happen anymore. People use referrals and they use the internet, and they use they'll respond to like a Zillow and they'll get somebody who paid money to get access to that, lead, right? So to become a real estate agent in the state of Maryland in particular is 60 hours. I did it in 17 days. I was already working another job. I did it I didn't even spend the whole day on it. I would just spend a couple hours a day on my laptop sitting on my deck and pass the test in order to be able to take the actual test. And within, I would say, 30 to 40 days, I was a licensed real estate agent. After 60 hours of training. Most of the training, by the way, has a lot to do with laws around how titles are held and land management and how many thousands of dollars of fines you pay if you screw this up, or how many days in jail you spend if you screw that up. How to help somebody navigate a process is not part of the training for the most part. How to help somebody decide whether or not which inspections to ask for is not part of the training. How to tell somebody how to position their house in the marketplace to get top dollar is not part of the training. So that gives you a little bit of insight into the challenge with the real estate industry. The structure of it incentivizes hiring or taking on a 1099 group of people, letting the ones who are going to be profitable rise to the top. And, making a little tiny bit of money off them. Most real estate companies nowadays are not profitable from real estate agents. What they do is they partner with title companies and mortgage companies, and that's where their profit comes from. Like a lot of them operate at a loss on the real estate commission side. So that needs to change. My suggestion would be take a similar tack that they do for appraisals. I wanted to be an appraiser before I became a real estate agent, only to find out you have to have like an associate's degree, like literal associate's degree, not like my daughter who's a cosmetologist. She had to take 1,500 hours of training just to be able to cut my hair, which she did. Looks good, right? And to be able to paint somebody's nails. Like the worst thing that could happen is she'll like cut my hair wrong and it's going to grow back. If I screw my job up and you lose tens of thousands of dollars, like what's worse? You know? So I would suggest making it so that the model of compensation incentivizes brokerages to create a very structured, I still can't think of the word I'm looking for, the term, but just create a very structured set of protocols for how to handle a client so that people end up getting a similar experience.